Hello and welcome back to Mark's House and Garden UK. These are hydrangeas, or Hydrangea Annabelle to be precise. I'm holding this big piece of insulation board behind them so that you can see them. And in case you're thinking they're not looking at their best, then you're absolutely right, because they're not. It's February. And this is the time of year when these are looking quite sorry. But I will drop in some footage of what these look like when they are in their best. Now these have been in these pots now for 2 years, and at the back end of last year I did notice that they were starting to look a little bit weary and tired. So in this video I'm going to do 2 or 3 things. The first one is I'm going to talk about pruning. Pruning hydrangeas is an interesting subject. Then I'm going to plant them in the ground, and I'll show you where I'm going to plant them in a moment. I'm also going to get them out of these pots and have a look at the roots, because I might need to do some work on the roots. Now, hydrangeas is a broad subject. These are Annabelle, but there are lots of different types of hydrangeas, and you prune them in different ways. So if you're about to prune a hydrangea and it's not an Annabelle, then I would suggest that you click the link below this video, which is a link to an RHS article which covers the broad spectrum, I should say, of hydrangeas and tells you how to prune each different type. What I'm doing today applies to Hydrangea Annabelle, and it's what I've always done and it's always worked. So by the end of the summer, these will be back up here and covered in those beautiful white blooms. Incidentally, I'll just drop in for interest a little shot of one of these hydrangea blooms covered in ice during the winter. It was wonderful. And I did that because these plants are quite architectural in a way, and if you leave the blooms on them for the winter time, you get something to look at of interest in the cold, dark winter months. Right, let me show you where these are going, then I'll come back here and I will talk about how I'm going to prune them. Then we'll get them out of the pots, have a look at the roots, then we'll plant them. And at the end of the summer, when these are looking magnificent, I will do an update video and I will post a link towards the end of this one, and it will appear somewhere here. So you will get to see what happens to these. But suffice it to say, they're going to come back and they're going to be wonderful. Come with me and I'll show you where they're going to be planted. Now over here is my arid gravel desert bed. And further on along this path, at the front of the cottage, is my parterre garden. And just here, between the two, there is a gap. It's about 1 metre wide and 2.5 to 3 metres long. And I'm going to plant those hydrangeas in here so that they form, in the summertime, a kind of hedge. That will divide these two distinct types of garden. But the gravel underneath the foot will be continuity, so that will bring them together. So I'm kind of hoping to create 2 sort of garden rooms. The arid bed here, the parterre at the front, separated by this sort of boundary of Hydrangea Annabelle. So this is where they're going to be, and obviously I've got a bit of tidying up to do. I'll give you that in fast forward. It'll take about 10 seconds. I want to cut this hedge back, clear the gravel away. I'm not going to dig the holes yet, because I don't know how big the holes have got to be till I look at the root balls. See you in a second when I've tidied the area. So that is our planting area prepared. I've not dug the holes yet. I did fork over the ground just to check the condition of the soil. It's quite compacted, but when I dig the holes, that will solve that problem. Right, pruning. Again, refer to the RHS link below. With Annabelles, it's really straightforward, but with some hydrangeas, they flower on last year's growth. So you don't prune them in the same way as I'm about to prune these. And what you're about to see will look pretty brutal and dramatic, because quite simply all I'm going to do is prune them right down to just above the level of where the stalks emerge from the ground, and they will grow back from there this season, and they will reach this height in this season. So with other types of hydrangeas, you don't prune all of the plant all of the time. You selectively prune and you leave some branches on. That's where the blooms will appear. And also some people believe that it's a good idea to leave the blooms on, or the remnants of the blooms, because they protect next year's buds throughout the winter. So a little snippet of what's in that RHS guide, what I'm going to do now, applies to Hydrangea Annabelle. I'll leave this behind so that you can see what I'm doing, and I'll bring the camera in close and I'll run it in fast forward, but it really isn't difficult. I'm just going to prune them down to the ground. Then we'll get them out of the pots and have a look at the roots. So in I go with my secateurs. I'm looking for a bud, and I'm pruning just above a bud, and that bud is where the new growth will emerge from. You'll notice in a moment that I leave 4 branches not pruned, and that's because they're not hydrangea branches. They are the supports which I put in place for this plant with string around them, and I will have to do that again this year, because there's 2 types of these Hydrangea Annabelles. There's Hydrangea Annabelle, and then there's Hydrangea Annabelle Strong. This is not the strong variety. The stronger variety is more resistant to wind damage. So what I do is every year I put some stakes in the pot, and I put string around them. They're just bits of branch off my apple tree. But you can see there, I've pruned that right down. Do not worry, it will grow back. Is it still alive? It is still alive, and I know it's still alive because where I'm cutting, in the cross section of all these branches, there's lots of lovely green growth. I'll bring the camera in close and show it to you. And I hope that the camera can pick that up there. There's green on the outer edge of all these stalks. So this will spring back into life. Can you see it there? Is that focusing? I don't know. I can certainly see it. I hope you can too. Now, as I've pruned that, I've noticed that there are some branches coming out over here at the edge of the pot and here. And that's the plant in the centre. So I'm hoping that I might be able to divide off a few spare plants. Now, my mum gave me these 2 years ago for my birthday. If I can grow a few baby plants off this, I can give them back to my mum and Brian for their garden. Right, I'll prune the other 2 in fast forward, then we'll get them out of the pots. Now, as I remove these stakes from this one, I want to point out something interesting. These are branches off my apple tree. That one's obviously dead, and that has no roots on it. But this one here has got new branches and buds on it. And I remember last year that actually had leaves on it. So that stake has rooted. So once again, I'm going to try and recover that and put it in a pot. And who knows, it may end up in the future giving me some free apples. Right, so the next job really is to get these out of the pots and have a look at the roots and see if we can divide them up. All the twigs that I've cut off will go straight onto my wildlife twig pile down by my wildlife pond. And that will create new life in my garden by adding to the biodiversity in the ecosystem. I'm going to lay some fabric on the floor here now so that I can tip these out and have a look at the roots. This is one of those ton bags. I've just ripped it open and it'll come in handy. So let's tackle this one first. This is the one that I'm hoping to get some babies off. So I'll just tilt it forwards and see if I can get it out of the tub. And there it is. Now you will notice, I hope, that this has got an old compost bag underneath it. Hydrangea. I always think hydration. They like water. They like to be wet. So they like to be in moist, well-draining soil. So that's why I put that along the bottom. I've also got some polystyrene in there, and that will have to save me some money on compost, because you don't always have to fill right to the bottom of these tubs. So let's get that out of the way. And you can see that this has got a very healthy root ball, but it's also pot bound. You can see the roots are here at the extent of the pot, and that's probably why it was starting to look a little bit tired. I'm going to tease a lot of the soil away from this. Is February a good idea to be planting plants? Well, they sell bare root plants at this time of year, don't they? So I think this is going to be fine because it's in its dormant period. Delivery van's just gone past, so apologies if there was some noise there. Those are the plants there that I'm hoping can provide babies. Let's get the fork into this now. Do a bit of damage to those roots so that when the soil starts to warm up, it will stimulate new growth. And look, you can see here, there's a little baby plant there, and there's another little baby plant there. And if I delve a little bit deeper, I can probably get a bit of root off with that. And we can put that in a pot, in some moist compost, and that will hopefully grow on to be a new plant. But I will endeavour to try and get some root with it. Right, I'll go as far back as there. Look at that, a new hydrangea, and there'll be another one over here. There we go, 3 depotted, desoiled and defoliated or pruned Hydrangea Annabelles, and 1, 2, 3, 4 Hydrangea Annabelle plants and a rose sapling. Now I remember that these, I think, were about 20 quid each, and they were nowhere near as big as this. They were probably about the same size as those. 20, 40, 60, 80 quid's worth of free plants. Isn't that amazing? Right, I'm going to go and dig some holes now. Slightly bigger than this root ball, and I will put some compost in the bottom. I will not be washing them because I don't want them to sit with wet roots until they start growing. Let's go back to the prepared plot and dig some holes and get some compost in. Did you notice my hack, by the way? Using a soldering iron to cut this woven weed fabric. It's a great idea. Do it in the open air where there's no fumes, but it seals it as it cuts it. Fantastic. I got the idea off the internet. There was a heat knife for about 80 quid. That was 15 quid. Does exactly the same job. And so this is where my lovely Hydrangea Annabelles are going to spend the rest of their days, in a nice straight line of 3 to create a kind of boundary between the two gardens. I'm going to dig some holes now. Not much bigger than the root ball. And whereas with my arid plants, I always plant them slightly proud, these, I will be planting them exactly the same level. And in the earth around them, I will dig a little channel. You'll see this in a moment. So that when the water does hit the gravel, it kind of gravitates towards the hydrangea hydration. Right, let's dig some holes. So there we are, 3 hydrangeas in their holes. The holes are not much bigger than the plant itself. Now, some people do suggest that if you're planting a plant out of a pot that's been pot bound and its roots are in a circle, you should dig a square hole so that that encourages the roots to reach out into the corners. Now, I've already opened up the roots, as you can see, so I don't need to worry about that. These will be planted at the same depth as they were before, But what I have done is I've used my long-handled Irish spade to put a slope on the outside edge of the hole so that when I rake back in the soil, it will fall down into the gap. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is just put a little bit of compost in the bottom of each of these holes. Not a lot, just a little bit, just to give them a little bit of nutrition when they do start growing. Let's get that out of the way. So there's our planting holes, and here is some compost. This compost will also retain a little bit of moisture around the bottom of the plant. I'm also going to do something else in a moment which will help this plant get the moisture it needs. Don't forget, I said earlier, I always think hydrangea, hydration. I don't know that there's any connection, but that's the way I see it. So there's a little bit of compost in the bottom of each hole, which will just dig it in a little bit so that it's not just pure compost around the root. And then it's really just a simple matter of putting these in these holes, and you will see the gravel back around these in a moment, and it will be like they've always been here. So they can go in there, and then I shall rake the soil back in. There's a third one, couldn't see it for a moment. I'm rushing a little bit at the moment because it's suddenly gone very dull, and it's February, and I'm worried it's going to go dark and we'll lose the light. So there they are. That one there could possibly be a little bit higher, so we'll just throw a little bit of earth in the bottom of there. That's more like it. And now I'm going to rake the soil back and then heel them in, and I'm going to heel them in a kind of a donut shape around the base of the plant. You'll see that in a moment. And because I've got those slanted edges on these holes, this soil is falling into the gap. Hopefully you'll be able to see that. In it goes. I'm just raking it around, getting it back into place. In theory there'll be a little bit of surplus soil because I've effectively put 3 buckets of root in these holes. Get rid of those rocks, don't need them in there. So now that they're planted in, I'm literally just going to go round with my heel and firm them in, and that will create almost like a canal around the base of each of these plants, like a donut shaped indentation, so that when the rain falls on the gravel that's about to be placed back on top, it will gravitate into that indentation and get down into the roots of the plants, as you can see. And that is what I'm doing here. We'll have one last little rake just to make sure that the soil is more or less level before we put this weed fabric back, and in a moment you will see the gravel back in place, and no one will know that anyone has been here. So there we are, job done. 3 hydrangea Annabelles planted in a row, ready for the spring, and I can't wait for the spring and the summer so that I can share with you some images when these have returned to their former glory. Trust me, they will grow 3 feet in the space of 2 or 3 months, and they'll be covered in those beautiful white blooms. I will have to stake them for support because they are susceptible to wind, but that's not a big problem because I can shove the stakes through the weed fabric. Hope you've enjoyed that. Pruning and planting Hydrangea Annabelle. Don't forget the RHS link to pruning all other types of hydrangea in the description box below this video. And I'll see you soon for some more hydrangea adventures. Bye for now.